Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. There was a time when I believed Jessica loved me. Maybe she did in her own way. But somewhere along the line, she stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as a convenient placeholder. Someone to rely on, to show off at dinner parties, to keep the house running while she went out to find herself. I didn't notice it at first. The small, cutting remarks disguised as jokes. The way she brushed off my ideas, my plans, my dreams. I let it go because I thought that's what marriage was, compromise. But it wasn't compromise. It was control. And the night I finally saw it clearly was the night she decided to humiliate me in front of everyone I knew. It was a dinner party at our house, something Jessica insisted on hosting every few months. The usual group was there, her friends, their husbands, a few colleagues from her charity work. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing, setting up the backyard, grilling steaks, making sure everything was perfect. Jessica barely acknowledged it. She was too busy holding court. As the night went on, the conversation shifted, as it always did, to careers, promotions, business deals. Jessica thrived in these moments, talking about high-end fundraisers and networking events as if she were running a Fortune 500 company instead of organizing charity luncheons. Then someone turned to me. "Ryan, what about you? You still at the same place?" I barely had a chance to answer before Jessica laughed. "Oh, Ryan? He's not exactly climbing the corporate ladder." She waved a hand dismissively. "He's more of a background guy. Likes to keep things simple." The table chuckled. I felt my stomach tighten. "I do a lot more than that, Jessica." She smirked, sipping her wine. "Oh, of course, honey. You're great at, what is it again? Spreadsheets." More laughter. I forced a smile, but inside, something was cracking. It wasn't just a joke. It was the way she said it. The way she looked at me, like I was nothing. Like she was better than me. She kept going, enjoying the attention. I mean, let's be real. If it weren't for me, he'd probably still be figuring out how to network. He's just comfortable, you know? Not the ambitious type. That did it. I put my drink down slowly. "Jessica." She tilted her head. "What?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Do you ever get tired of tearing me down?" The table went silent. Jessica blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." I exhaled. "You act like you're joking, but it's always the same thing. Always about how I'm not good enough. How to measure up. Why?" I leaned forward slightly. "Does it make you feel powerful? Putting me down?" Her expression hardened. "Oh, come on, Ryan. Don't be so dramatic." I nodded. "Right. Because when you do it, it's just a joke. But when I push back, I'm being dramatic." Jessica looked around the table, trying to find support. But no one was laughing anymore. She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood up, sliding my chair back. "Enjoy the rest of your night." Then I walked inside, leaving her speechless. I had spent years swallowing my pride. Years convincing myself that this was just how she was. That if I tried harder, loved her more, maybe she'd start respecting me again. But she never would, and I was finally starting to see it. I barely slept that night. The humiliation, the anger, the years of small cuts adding up to one deep wound. It all swirled in my mind, keeping me awake. Jessica had made a fool of me in front of our friends, again. But this time, I didn't just brush it off. I couldn't, because for the first time, I wasn't just embarrassed. I was furious. The next morning, Jessica acted like nothing happened. She woke up, stretched, and walked into the kitchen like she hadn't publicly mocked me the night before. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Morning," she said casually. I stared at her from across the room, my hands clenched into fists. That was it. No apology? No acknowledgement? Just another day in her world where she was the queen and I was the joke? I grabbed my keys. She barely looked up. "Where are you going?" "Out." She raised an eyebrow. "Okay. Well, don't forget we're meeting Brad and Emily for drinks tonight." I froze. Brad, my best friend, the one guy who had always been there. He and I had built our careers together, worked side by side for years. If there was anyone who should have spoken up when Jessica humiliated me last night, it was him. But he hadn't. Not a word. And that made something in me shift. "Yeah," I said, my voice even. "I won't forget." I walked out without another word. The bar was packed by the time we arrived that night. Jessica led the way in, greeting people like she was the mayor of the place, her confidence unshaken. I followed, my mind still racing, still replaying everything over and over. We spotted Brad and Emily in a booth near the back, drinks already in hand. Brad grinned when he saw Jessica, standing up to greet her with a hug that lasted a little too long. I clenched my jaw. I must have been imagining it, right? Brad was my friend. My best friend. There was no way. I shook the thought away. Focus. We sat down, the conversation flowing, drinks being poured. Jessica was in her element, laughing, tossing her hair, acting like nothing was wrong. But I wasn't laughing, and neither was Emily. She barely spoke, her eyes darting between Jessica and Brad like she was watching something she wasn't supposed to see. Then Jessica did it again. We were talking about work when Brad smirked and said, "Ryan, man, you're too nice. You let people walk all over you." Jessica laughed, loudly. "Tell me about it," she said, rolling her eyes. "I swear, sometimes I think he's scared to ask for what he really wants." The table chuckled. Something inside me snapped. I set my drink down. "You know what's funny?" Jessica tilted her head. "What?" I leaned forward, staring directly at her. "How you have so much to say about what I lack, but you never have anything to say about what you've lost." The smile slipped from her face. "Excuse me? You act like you're above me." I continued, my voice calm, controlled. "Like I'm just lucky to be in your orbit. But let me ask you something, Jessica." I tilted my head. "What exactly do you bring to the table?" The table went dead silent. Jessica's face twisted. "Are you serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious." She scoffed, looking to Brad for support, but he stayed quiet, shifting uncomfortably. That's when I knew. That's when I saw it. The way she looked at him. The slight tension in their body language. The way she had been so eager to meet up with him tonight. The way Emily wouldn't look either of them in the eye. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Jessica leaned back, crossing her arms. "Ryan, what is your problem?" I exhaled slowly. "You." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, give me a break. You're acting like some victim, when in reality, you've just never been strong enough to handle a woman like me." I smirked. "And what exactly is a woman like you?" Jessica opened her mouth, then hesitated. I waited. For once, she didn't have an answer. I grabbed my coat. "I'm done here." She scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Ryan." I shook my head. "No, you don't get to say that anymore." I turned to Emily, whose face was still tight with discomfort. "You should ask your husband some questions when you get home." Emily's eyes widened. Brad went pale. Jessica stiffened. "Ryan." I ignored her and walked out. The second the door shut behind me, I took a deep breath, my pulse pounding. I had spent so long convincing myself that if I just tried harder, if I just loved her more, things would get better. But they wouldn't, because Jessica didn't love me. She loved control. And now, she was about to lose it. I barely remember the drive home. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction, every moment that now seemed so obvious. The way Jessica had been acting for months, the constant digs at my confidence, the unexplained errands and gym sessions. I had been blind. And Brad? My best friend? The man who had stood beside me at my wedding? If my suspicions were right, he had been standing beside my wife in ways I never expected. I needed proof. Jessica came home an hour after me. She walked in like nothing happened, tossing her purse on the counter and sighing dramatically. "Seriously, Ryan? That little stunt at the bar? You made yourself look pathetic." I didn't respond. I just watched her, waiting for her to slip, to give me something. She scoffed when she realized I wasn't taking the bait. "Oh, don't tell me you're sulking. Grow up." I kept my voice calm. "You're home late." She frowned. I had to calm Emily down. She was freaking out because of what you said. I nodded slowly. "Good. She should be." Jessica rolled her eyes. "You were being paranoid. Just because you feel insecure doesn't mean you need to ruin other people's marriages." I tilted my head. "You sound awfully defensive." She froze for half a second, just long enough for me to see it. The flicker of panic before she masked it with irritation. "I'm not defensive, Ryan. I'm annoyed." I smiled. "That makes two of us." She grabbed a bottle of wine from the cabinet and poured herself a glass. I don't have time for your little tantrums. I'm exhausted. I let it go for now. But as soon as she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. It was locked, not with the usual passcode. She had changed it. A year of marriage, and she had never changed her passcode. My chest tightened. There it was. The next morning, I tore through the house the moment she left. I had never been the jealous, snooping type before, but that was because I never had a reason to be. Now, I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. And I found it. In the back of her closet, hidden under a pile of scarves, was a small black gift bag. I pulled it out, my fingers already ice cold. Inside was a luxury watch, sleek and expensive. Definitely not mine. My breath hitched when I saw the engraving on the back. To new beginnings, J. Jessica. My stomach twisted. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the watch in my hands. It wasn't just a gift. It was personal, thoughtful, something that carried meaning between two people. Two people who weren't me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. There was no denying it anymore. Jessica wasn't just emotionally cruel. She wasn't just manipulative. She was cheating on me. And, suddenly, everything made sense. The constant accusations. Are you seeing someone else? The irritation when I asked about her whereabouts. The way she laughed too easily at Brad's jokes. How she always found a way to touch his arm when she talked to him. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate. She had spent months making me feel weak, insecure, unworthy, all to justify what she was doing behind my back. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet, because Jessica thought she was untouchable. But now she was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. I started small. That night, I pretended nothing was wrong. I smiled when she walked through the door, kissed her cheek like I always did, and even asked about her day. She looked at me suspiciously. You're in a good mood. I nodded. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot. About my future. About what I really want. She smirked, sipping her wine. Finally growing up? I smiled. Something like that. She had no idea. Over the next week, I did what I had never done before. I watched her, paid attention to her habits, her schedule, the way she clung to her phone like it was life support. Then I set the trap. I swapped the luxury watch in the gift bag with a cheap, knockoff version I ordered online. Identical at first glance, but cheap enough that the second Brad put it on, he'd know something was wrong. Jessica never checked the bag, because in her mind, I was still the oblivious, clueless husband. I also installed a GPS tracker on her car. A simple device, plugged into her dashboard, syncing to my phone. I want to know exactly where she was going after our coffee dates, after her so-called yoga classes. The first day, she went straight to the gym. The second day, same thing. But on the third day, she drove straight to Brad's office. And she stayed there for over 2 hours. I stare at my phone, watching the little red dot sit still at the same address. The truth wasn't just speculation anymore. It was real, and that meant it was time for the next step. I reached out to an old friend of mine, someone in corporate hiring, someone who worked in the same industry as Brad. Hey, I said when he picked up, I've got a name for you to flag on background checks. He chuckled. What's the story? I smiled. Let's just say he's about to get a reputation. The final piece of the plan was timing. Jessica and Brad thought they were winning, thought they had played me, thought they were going to walk away unscathed. But the best part about being underestimated, no one sees you coming. So I waited for the day Jessica was planning to give Brad his surprise gift. Waited until I got confirmation that Brad had officially been flagged for ethics violations in the hiring system, something that would blacklist him from every major company in his field. And waited for the perfect moment to drop the hammer. Jessica had no idea that by the time she handed Brad that fake watch, his entire career would already be in flames. And as for her, she was about to lose everything, too. Jessica thought she was untouchable. She thought she had both of us fooled. Me, the clueless husband, and Brad, the confident executive who thought he was getting away with sleeping with his best friend's wife. But what they didn't realize was that I had stopped playing their game. Now, I was the one in control. I wasn't going to waste my time yelling. I wasn't going to beg her for the truth, demand an explanation, or let her twist reality to make me the villain. No, I was going to hit them where it hurt the most. For Jessica, that meant public humiliation. For Brad, It meant destroying his career, and I had the perfect plan to do both. The first step was solidifying Brad's downfall. I had already set things in motion with my contact in the corporate world, getting his name flagged and hiring databases. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure he never even had a chance to clear his name. So, I created a fake job promotion. Using a burner email, I posed as a recruiter from a well-known firm, one that Brad had been dying to work for. I crafted a convincing offer letter, complete with a six-figure salary, a signing bonus, and an executive ethics review process. It was just believable enough to hook him. Brad, being the arrogant idiot he was, took the bait immediately. Jessica was ecstatic. She came home that night glowing, talking about how Brad finally got the recognition he deserved and how this could be life-changing. I nodded along, barely containing my smirk. Sounds like a great opportunity. She smiled, completely oblivious. Yeah, it really is. She had no idea that Brad was about to lose everything. The next step was setting up Jessica's public downfall. I knew she had planned a small get-together with our closest friends at our house that weekend. Perfect. I made sure everyone was coming. I even reached out to a few of her friends personally, making sure they wouldn't miss it. They all thought it was just another casual gathering. It wasn't. It was going to be the night Jessica lost her reputation. That morning, while she was out running errands, probably seeing Brad, I prepped the final pieces of my plan. I printed copies of her text messages with Brad, the ones where she laughed about how Ryan doesn't suspect a thing and how I feel like I finally have a real man in my life. I also recorded a short message on my phone, something simple, something direct. A confession. Her confession. Then I waited. That night, the house was full of people. Jessica was in her element, laughing, drinking, completely unaware that she was standing on a trapdoor. Brad wasn't there yet. Perfect. I stood in the kitchen, watching the scene unfold. Jessica was performing, like she always did, making little jokes at my expense, playing the charming hostess. She had no clue what was coming. Then the front door opened. Brad walked in, all confidence and arrogance, giving Jessica a small nod before casually sliding his arm around her waist. In front of everyone, I felt my hands tighten into fists. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Jessica glanced at me, almost as if daring me to react. I smiled. Let her have this last moment of false security. I cleared my throat. Hey, everyone, I called out. Can I get your attention for a second? The room quieted. Jessica looked at me, confused. Brad frowned. What's up, man? I pulled out a small remote and clicked a button. The TV screen behind me lit up. Jessica's face went pale, because right there, in front of everyone, was a slideshow of her text with Brad. Every message, every emoji, every single disgusting, backstabbing word. The room fell dead silent. Jessica froze. Brad stared in horror. I let the images sit there for a moment, letting the weight of their betrayal sink in. Then I pulled out the contract. I turned to Brad, holding up the printed job promotion I had faked. Brad, buddy, you applied for promotion recently, right? His mouth opened, but no words came out. I smirked. Yeah, about that. Turns out, the company does extensive background and ethical reviews on all applicants. I waved the papers in the air. And guess what showed up in your file? The room gasped. Brad's face drained of all color. Ryan, what did you do? I chuckled. I just made sure your potential employers knew exactly the kind of man they were considering. And wouldn't you know it, I clapped a hand on his shoulder. You're now blacklisted from every major company in the industry. Jessica let out a small gasp. You're lying. I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Her voice filled the room. I miss you. I feel alive with you. Ryan has no idea, and honestly, I don't care if he ever finds out. Jessica stumbled back. The room erupted. People whispered. Some looked at her in disgust. Others shook their heads at Brad, who looked like he was about to be sick. I wasn't finished. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Jessica stared at it, already knowing what it was. Divorce papers, I said, my voice cool. Already signed. You don't get a say in this. It's done. She shook her head violently. Ryan, please, I smiled. No, Jessica. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more us. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. I turned to the crowd. Thanks for coming, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the show. And then, without looking back, I walked out of my own house, leaving Jessica standing in the ruins of her perfect life. I didn't stop walking until I was a full block away from the house. The night air was crisp, cool against my skin, but inside, I felt nothing but fire. My hands trembled, my pulse pounded in my ears, but it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. For the first time in years, I had broken free from Jessica's control. I didn't turn back. I didn't care what was happening inside that house. Jessica's frantic attempts to spin the situation, Brad's pathetic stammering, the whispers and judgment from people they had both considered friends. They had built their entire relationship on lies, and now the entire world saw them for what they really were. And I was done with both of them. I pulled out my phone, checked my notifications. Dozens of messages, some from people who had been at the party, others from mutual friends who had already heard about the disaster. Some offered support. Others just wanted to know if it was really true. I ignored them all and got into my car. I had one last loose end to tie up. Brad's career was already dead. The blacklist had taken care of that. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to look him in the eye one last time and watch as he realized just how much he had lost. I parked outside his apartment and waited. It didn't take long. Less than an hour after I left the party, I saw his car swerve into the parking lot. He barely had time to park before he stumbled out, slamming his door shut. He looked wrecked. His shirt was untucked, his face pale, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his keys. He knew his life was in ruins. I stepped out of my car and shut the door. Rough night. Brad jumped. He spun around, his eyes wide. Ryan. I took a slow step forward, shoving my hands in my pockets. Calm. In control. I thought we should have a little talk. His jaw tightened. You set me up. I smirked. No, Brad. You set yourself up. I just helped speed up the process. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. You had no right. I cut him off. No right? Brad, you slept with my wife. My wife. The woman you toasted at our wedding. The woman you stood beside me for, telling me how lucky I was. And now you want to talk about rights? His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing. I stepped closer, my voice lowering. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself. You threw away everything. Your friendship, your career, your reputation. All for what? I scoffed. Jessica. His eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. I chuckled. Let me ask you something. How does it feel, knowing you lost everything? His hands curled into fists. I'll fix it. I shook my head, smirking. No, Brad. You won't. Because you can't. He swallowed hard. It's not over. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. It is for me. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the dark, his world crumbling around him. Jessica called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again, and again. By the fourth call, I picked up. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to make sure she understood that this wasn't something she could fix. Her voice was shaky. Ryan, please just hear me out. I leaned back in my chair, my tone calm. Why? She hesitated. Because we've been through too much for you to just walk away. I let out a sharp laugh. Jessica, you walked away first. I just didn't realize it until now. She sniffled. I messed up. I nodded. Yeah, you did. A beat of silence. Then she switched tactics. Ryan, I was lonely, she whispered. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage. My jaw tightened. You made me feel invisible every day, Jessica, and I never once cheated. She exhaled shakily. I was stupid. I was selfish. But it didn't mean I didn't love you. I smirked. Yeah? Well, it sure as hell didn't mean you did. She let out a choked sob. I don't know what to do. I leaned forward. You deal with it, Jessica. Just like I had to deal with all the years you made me feel like I wasn't enough. Just like Brad has to deal with the fact that he's never going to work in this industry again. You live with what you did. She swallowed hard. You're really done, aren't you? I smiled. I was done the moment you gave up on us. I just didn't see it until now. A long silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, Do you hate me? I thought about it. About all the pain, all the years of being made to feel small, all the ways she had tried to break me. Then I realized the truth. No, I said simply. I don't hate you, Jessica. You're not worth the energy. And then, for the final time, I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. Jessica tried to fix things. She tried to reach out to mutual friends, to control the narrative, but the damage had already been done. People saw through her. She wasn't the victim. She was the problem. And as for Brad, word spread fast in the corporate world. His name was officially tainted. No firm would touch him. He tried to fight it, but in the end, he had no one to blame but himself. Jessica and Brad had thought they were untouchable, that they could lie, cheat, and manipulate their way through life. But in the end, they played themselves. The silence was the first thing I noticed. For years, my life had been filled with Jessica's voice, her nagging, her laughter when she mocked me, her carefully crafted words meant to keep me under her thumb. But now, without her, there was nothing but peace, and I was finally learning to enjoy it. Jessica moved out 2 days after our final phone call. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't care. She left in a rush, throwing together whatever she could fit in her car. There were no long goodbyes, no final attempts at convincing me to change my mind. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Maybe she realized, far too late, that I wasn't the same man she had controlled for years. The house felt empty at first, but not in a sad way. More like a space finally clearing for something better. That first morning alone, I woke up late, not because I was exhausted, but because for the first time in years, my mind was at peace. No stress, no second guessing, no waking up to Jessica reminding me of everything I wasn't. I made myself breakfast, sat at the kitchen table, and ate in silence. It was the best meal I had in years. The fallout from the party was swift. Jessica tried to spin the story, claiming that I had set her up, that I was the real villain, that I had been neglecting her for years. But no one bought it. Too many people had seen the evidence. The texts, the voice recordings, the way she had clung to Brad, not realizing the walls were closing in around her. Brad, on the other hand, went into hiding. Word spread quickly in the corporate world. Within days, his name was toxic. No company wanted to touch him. The job offer I had faked? Pulled. Any other opportunities? Blacklisted. And the worst part? Jessica had nowhere to go. Brad cut her off. The moment he realized his career was over, he panicked. And Jessica? She was just another liability. Their little affair had ruined both of them. And now, they were paying the price. One night, about a week after she left, Jessica showed up at my doorstep. I had been expecting it. I opened the door to find her standing there in the dim porch light, looking nothing like the woman she used to be. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was gone. Her clothes weren't the perfectly styled outfits she always insisted on wearing. She looked small. "Ryan," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "About what?" She swallowed. I don't know. About us. About what happens now." I sighed, shaking my head. "There is no us, Jessica. There hasn't been for a long time." Her eyes filled with tears. "I messed up." I didn't respond. She stepped closer. "Ryan, I was stupid. I was selfish. But I loved you. I really did." I let out a slow breath. "No, you didn't. You love control. You loved having someone to blame when you weren't happy. But me? You never really loved me." She shook her head violently. "That's not true." I gave her a small, almost pitying smile. "Isn't it? Because if you really loved me, Jessica, you wouldn't have spent years tearing me down. You wouldn't have humiliated me in front of our friends. And you sure as hell wouldn't have slept with my best friend." She wiped at her face. "I was lonely." I exhaled, shaking my head. "That's not an excuse. I was lonely too. You made me feel invisible every single day. But I never cheated." Her lip trembled. I cut her off. "Jessica, let me ask you something." She looked up. I met her gaze. "If I never caught you, if I never exposed everything, would you have ever stopped?" She blinked. I waited. Then, after a long, agonizing pause, she whispered, "No, that was all I needed to hear." I nodded. "That's what I thought." She let out a shaky breath. "So what now?" I smiled. "Now, you deal with the consequences of your own choices." She took a deep breath. "Ryan, do you hate me?" I tilted my head, considering it. Then I sighed. "No, Jessica, I don't hate you. I gave her a small, cold smile. I just don't care about you anymore. Her face crumpled. I stepped back and shut the door in her face. And just like that, it was over. The next few weeks were a blur of rebuilding. I packed up the last of Jessica's things and had them sent to whatever sad little apartment she was renting. I spent more time at the gym, getting back into shape, not for revenge, not for validation, but for myself. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with while Jessica had made me small. I threw myself into work, picking up new projects, setting new goals, realizing that I had wasted so much time trying to please a woman who would never be satisfied. And with every passing day, I felt lighter, stronger, happier. Then, one day, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short, simple. Brad lost everything. Jessica's struggling. Thought you'd like to know. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, with a small smirk, I deleted the message. I didn't need updates on them, because for the first time in years, I was finally free. And I wasn't looking back. The divorce process started faster than I expected. Maybe because I'd already set everything in motion, or maybe because Jessica didn't have a choice. Either way, once the papers were served, there was no turning back. She tried to stall, of course. At first, she ignored the documents, refusing to sign. Then she tried to negotiate, saying we should talk things through like adults. When that didn't work, she went for the victim card, telling anyone who would listen that I was being cruel, that I had ruined her life, and was now heartless enough to leave her with nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me, because that's exactly what she had done to me for years. And now, she was the one losing everything. I walked into my lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. He greeted me with a smirk. "You're in a good mood." I chuckled. "Let's just say I'm looking forward to this." He motioned for me to sit. "Well, you're going to love what I have for you." He slid a thick manila folder across the table. Jessica's lawyer finally responded. I opened it, scanning the documents. She was fighting for money, spousal support, half of our assets, even a portion of my retirement fund. I allowed a sharp laugh. "You got to be kidding me." My lawyer grinned. "Not at all. She claims emotional distress and that you publicly humiliated her beyond repair." I raised an eyebrow. And the fact that she cheated? She's trying to spin it as a mistake brought on by neglect. Says she was driven to it because she felt unloved in the marriage. I sat back, shaking my head. Unbelievable. "Not really," my lawyer said. "It's classic manipulation. She spent years tearing you down, and now that she's exposed, she wants to rewrite the story." I nodded slowly. Of course she did. Jessica never took responsibility for anything. She was the queen of gaslighting, twisting reality until she came out looking like the victim. But this time, she had nothing to stand on. I tapped the folder. "Let's make it clear, we're not settling. No spousal support, no money. She gets exactly what she brought into this marriage." My lawyer smirked. "Already ahead of you. I sent over a counteroffer this morning." He pulled out another document and slid it toward me. "We're playing hardball." I glanced at the page and grinned. "No alimony, no assets, no padut." And the best part? We were including all the evidence of her affair in the official proceedings. The texts, the voice recordings, the timeline. Jessica hadn't just cheated. She had used marital funds to do it. Fancy dinners, weekend spa trips that were actually rendezvous with Brad. That expensive watch she had bought him, paid for with our shared account. Legally, that was considered financial misconduct. And that meant she wasn't just walking away with nothing. She was walking away in debt. The next time I saw Jessica was at our divorce mediation. She walked in with her lawyer, wearing her usual mask of confidence. Hair perfect, expensive designer bag in hand, but I saw through it. She was barely holding it together. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the strap on her shoulder. She looked at me, expecting something, anger, regret, maybe even guilt. She got nothing. I just sat back, calm, relaxed, watching as she finally faced the reality of her own destruction. Her lawyer cleared his throat. "My client feels that the current terms are unfair." My lawyer barely blinked. "Your client committed adultery, repeatedly lied, and misused marital funds to finance an extramarital relationship. Legally, she's already walking away with more than she deserves." Jessica exhaled sharply. "Ryan, I turned to her, my voice even. What? Her lower lip trembled slightly. You don't have to do this. I tilted my head. Do what? Punish me, she whispered. Already lost everything. You made your point. Can't we just end this civilly? I chuckled. Jessica, you spent years tearing me down, making me feel like I wasn't enough. And now that you're the one who's losing, you want to end things civilly? She blinked rapidly. I made mistakes, Ryan. I nodded. You did. And now you get to live with them. Her breath hitched. Please. I exhaled. Jessica, I'm not punishing you. I'm just finally treating you the way you treated me. She looked like she was about to break. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We're prepared to negotiate. My lawyer cut him off. No negotiations. Either sign the papers or take this to court. But I guarantee you, if we go to trial, she's going to walk away with even less. Jessica stared at the documents in front of her. She knew it was over. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. She hesitated. Then, with one final stroke, she signed her name. It was done. The next morning, my lawyer called. Congratulations, he said. You're officially a free man. I let out a slow breath, staring out the window of my new apartment. Free. The word felt light, like I had been carrying a weight for years and finally let it go. Jessica was no longer my problem. Brad was no longer my problem. My past was no longer my problem. I wasn't just divorced. I was reborn. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally excited about the future. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.